You are listening to C-Suite Perspectives, a podcast by the Conference Board.
Welcome to C-Suite Perspectives, a signature series by the Conference Board. I'm Steve Odland from the Conference Board and the host of this podcast series. And in today's conversation, we're going to talk about this ongoing U.S. government shutdown. Joining me today is Ron Klein, partner at Holland & Knight and the former congressman from the state of Florida. Ron, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Steve. Happy to be here.
So, Ron, our listeners are business leaders around the country, and everyone's been reading the headlines, and we've experienced this before. But let's just start with the basics. What is a shutdown? What's actually shut and what isn't shut?
Okay, so maybe we'll start from the beginning here. The United States federal government runs on a fiscal year of September 30th is the last day. And of course, like any other government or even business for that matter, in particular with government, the federal government or state governments, you have to have a budget that is approved by the legislative body before the fiscal year starts in order for there to be authority to spend money. In this case, the federal government through Congress over the last number of years has been late and not meeting the September 30th deadline. This has been going on for many years. And what they will typically do in order to keep the government running, because they have to do something, they have to create the authority to spend money, is they will pass what they call, you may have heard the term CR, which stands for Continuing Resolution. What that means is that the budget for the previous year will continue in the exact same category, same amount in each category for a period of time. They'll do it for 30 days or 60 days or 5 days, just to get it to a place where they can pass the budget for the next year. In this case, they ended the year, didn't have a CR, so the budget is not there to spend money, and that it creates what they call a shutdown. A shutdown is the government doesn't have the money to spend, and with the exception of a handful of things, that means that people who are employed by the government, that means people who have contracts with the government, people who are recipients of government spending, with the exception of Social Security, and like I said, there are a few exceptions, but it could be anything from military, could be construction contractors, could be air traffic controllers you've been hearing about, could be programs. There's the latest one they've been talking about the last couple of days is the food assistance program for people who depend on the government for assistance. All those things are not funded and therefore will not receive money. And that doesn't mean certain people aren't working, and they call them necessary employees like air traffic controllers. We can't have the whole system shut down, but it means they are not getting paid. So they're working without pay for the moment. Typically what happens once the government is properly funded, they'll get back pay or retroactive pay.
Yeah. Now, the problem with that is that a lot of people live paycheck to paycheck. In fact, the majority of Americans live paycheck to paycheck, and government employees are part of that as well. And so you see when they're not getting paid, you see these people calling in sick and trying to get cash through whatever else side jobs or whatever else they can do to raise cash. So even the essential employees are down. And so therefore you see airports being shut down or slowed down or flights being canceled as a result of that. But that's just one area. So what is not shut down? What is still open and running?
Again, first of all, everything you said is correct, Steve. Those are that's the reality check. You can watch the parties bicker or the president say, I want to be involved, or I don't want to be involved. And all this is going on at the same time, but they're not getting the job done. And the result is the things you just discussed. That's just a fraction of all the government operations that aren't funded. Now, things that are absolutely necessary to keep our lives running, for example, military, they're still working their job. They're not walking off the job. But certain things are many agencies that are not considered essential. That's the term they use. It could be the HUD, the agency that handles housing and urban development. It could be HHS, the agency that handles health and human services. Again, some certain things like FDA approving drugs, or the CDC watching the communicable diseases and things like that. They're on a skeleton staff. So there's some real things going on here that people really need to be aware of, because it does affect their livelihood. And if it doesn't affect them immediately, it's coming.
And you've got inspectors like FDA, so food inspectors. You've got port inspectors. And is it disrupting shipments and receipts into ports and manufacturing of food and that sort of thing?
Absolutely. To some degree it is. The inspectors you just talked about, generally speaking, are not doing the inspections. They're not working. Most of them aren't considered essential. Some of the federal courts are in a slowdown phase. But yeah, there are real things that affect people. Listen, there's leisure things like the national parks are closed. So for people who plan trips and things like that. But there are, like the air traffic controllers is one of the reasons the last shutdown finally ended, because the public said, wait a minute, stop, too much. We really depend on air. We depend on for business, for travel, for family, for all sorts of things. And in this case, enough air traffic control said at some point, I can't work without getting paid. I need to find something else to do to get paid to make ends meet.
You made an important distinction. Okay, so there is the budget, and Congress is supposed to pass a budget each year. They haven't done that in a long time. They've done it very seldom. It's really a struggle. And I know they're frustrated as well, but they've gotten around it with these continuing resolutions, or so-called CRs, as you said. In this case, the issue is they haven't passed the CR even. So forget about the budget. It's a CR, even for 10 days, 20 days, 2 months, whatever it is, they haven't done it. Now, let's just be blunt, it's politics, it's gamesmanship, and both sides have employed it. And so typically they're one side is trying to get something out of the other side. What are the issues currently? What does each side want?
So let me clarify one point you just made to
you.
make sure that everybody understands what we're talking about here. The shutdown is because there is no CR or full appropriations bills passed. They eventually will pass a full appropriations. That's what they do. It just takes longer than the September 30th date. The CRs, as long as they're in place, will continue to keep the government operating under the previous year's budget, but they will eventually do. Now, they didn't do it last year, and they just kept the same number, but that's unusual. Usually they never get it on time, which was your initial point, but they eventually do. And sometimes it takes till Christmas week because everyone wants to get home for Christmas or whatever it may take, but they eventually get there. This year, they seem to be really in their corners, and that's why a shutdown occurred. And until that gets resolved, these agencies will not reopen.
And what does each side want? So where are the lines?
So I think what the Republicans are saying is, hey, we'll quote unquote negotiate things that you care about as long as you reopen the government. That's the simple point. Just do a CR to keep the government open. And the Democrats are saying, first of all, we think that one of the big issues, and probably the biggest thing they're hanging their hat on, is the healthcare subsidies for the less fortunate in our society that depend on the Obamacare subsidies. Those are going to go up from about $800 to $2,400 a month if there's no subsidies in place. That's a big deal for Democrats, the way they're hanging their hat on that. Republicans are saying either that's not important, or they're saying we'll come back and negotiate that later. I think the real story here is the lack of trust on either side. The Democrats feel President Trump has gone back on commitments that Congress had authorized, everything from USAID to a lot of other things that were already in place. And the Republicans feel like, hey, we can't trust the Democrats for a variety of reasons there. So it's a trust factor. I think essentially President Trump's going to have to weigh in at some point here and bring the parties together and say, listen, you may have difference of views here, but we got to find a solution here. Until that happens, unfortunately, it's going to drag on a bit.
Okay, so help me with that a little bit, because this is in Congress, and you have it's really in the Senate, because the House has passed it, because the voting rules are different in the House. The Senate requires a 60 vote, or 60%. In this case, they're up to 54, Ron?
I think so.
Yeah. So they're 6 votes shy of hitting the 60. So they do have a majority. They just don't have the 60 supermajority that they need. All right. So it's really there. Why are you saying that the president needs to weigh in? Is this the bully pulpit leadership issue, or is there something in the governance?
Two things. Number one, appropriations bills require the signing by the president. The president's part of this process. It's a legislative bill that will fund the government. And
right, but he can't sign it if they don't pass it. He's not required at this point until they pass something.
He's not required to do anything, but just like any other bill, a president's office always plays a role in the development of legislation. Because he's not going to wait until something's dropped on his desk and say, I don't like it. Any big bill that comes through, whether it's transportation or healthcare, whatever it is, president's office always have something to say about it. I was just making the point, and I think that a lot of people are saying that, and it's not a blame thing. It's more of just a leadership role that a president plays. This is typical when you have these kinds of shutdowns. A president, whoever it is, Democrat or Republican, usually at some point has to step in and say, guys, we need to figure out this problem here, and then logjam.
Yeah, and I just wanted to clarify that for our listeners because
Sure.
he doesn't have until that thing is passed. Then he signs it or he doesn't.
He doesn't have a formal, correct. He doesn't have a formal role, and it's a bill. So once the bill's
But it's
presented to him, he can sign it, veto, or whatever. It's
okay.
just more of a leadership kind of style thing.
Okay, so now it's not an unimportant point. It's a really important point because to your point, this happens on every bill. It's required. So why is the White House not stepping in here?
President Trump has a different style than previous presidents, Republican and Democrat. He just does things differently, and he's president. He's entitled to do that. I'm just pointing out historically the role the president has played when it gets to a point like this, is they will step in. And in this case, President Trump has a pretty lockstep Republican Party behind him. So if he wants to do something, presumably he's going to have some following. He did call the senators, Republican senators, into the White House last week and basically told them to hold firm. So at the moment, I think again, listen. This is not a question of right or wrong. He believes in his line of thinking in terms of the way the budget should come out. Democrats have a different view, and it's just going to take some force of the public coming forward at some point and saying, "Guys, enough is enough." And one party usually ends this thing because there's some public pressure that boils up and says, "Hey, listen, it's your fault." And there's a political reason for someone to say, "Hey, enough, and let's move on." That's probably what will happen at some point. I don't think it's clear which party is feeling it more at this point.
No, so it comes down to, and I'm oversimplifying it, but it comes down to these subsidies because the Republicans have said, pass a clean continuing resolution, and then we'll talk about the subsidies. And you've heard many of the Republicans say we can't go without subsidies. So it's not that they're saying no subsidies. They're just saying the process they want is a clean, and then we'll talk about it. The Democrats are saying no, put the subsidies in, and then we'll pass the bill. So there is some political gamesmanship,
Yeah, and I think, and Steve, in all fairness, I think you've had a number of Republican leaders, including number three, Scalise, who's the number three in the House caucus, has said, no subsidies. We're not doing subsidies, no matter what. So it's not like there's 100%, oh yeah, we're going to do subsidies later on. And there's no guarantees in this process anyway. But I think the Democrats are feeling this is their point of leveraging what they think is very important. It's not like they're focusing on 10, 15 things here. They've got one item. And, at this point, for the moment, we'll see what happens.
Got it. Okay. And so now the pinch point is probably going to happen pretty quickly here because November 1st is the point where this stuff stops. SNAP, as you said, SNAP and WIC which are the food subsidies and payment and so forth. So the pressure should build starting to next week. It feels you were there, you were in the middle of all this stuff. It feels like everybody's waiting until the public pressure builds in order to see which way, whose side is in favor here and which of these two approaches wins. Is that a fair read?
Yeah, I think that's correct. Another group I want to mention, Steve, because it may be some of our listeners that may be interested in this as well. Major government contracts are also not getting paid. You have major companies in the United States and subcontractors and subcontractors and material suppliers, all sorts of people, all the way down the food chain of the economy that are also being impacted by the fact that the federal government is not cutting checks right now for services being rendered. So that's a big deal because if you're a business and you're not getting the cash flow of that money coming in for work that you're under contract to do, you can't pay your employees. So it's not just a question of direct federal employees that are feeling the pinch here. Contractors at some point have to say, listen, I can't go to the bank, or I can only go to the bank for so much before I know that I'm going to get paid here. And it begins to have an impact through hundreds of thousands of jobs at the federal contractor level as well. And some of these are military, some are defense, some are, again, the whole gamut. There's thousands and thousands of federal contracts that are equally part of the process here. Again, another pinch point that over time could have an impact that will put pressure on Congress. Also, it's a recognition that's affecting the economy as well. So these are things that are contributing to, and I think the Treasury Secretary over the weekend said it's beginning to cut into the economy a bit. So that's a good reason why Congress needs to get its act together.
We're talking about the U.S. government shutdown. We're going to take a short break and be right back.
What does the future of work mean for your employees? How will your company navigate the future of AI? Will there be a global recession? At the Conference Board, our experts translate the latest research and economic analysis into insights and real-time problem solving for your organization. Membership at the Conference Board provides your team with an assortment of knowledge from economics, marketing and communications, governance and sustainability, public policy, and human capital. As a member, you'll have access to our center experts, member-exclusive events, data and benchmarking tools, and peer sharing that will help you understand the present and shape the future. Consider becoming a Conference Board member today by visiting www.conference-board.org.
Welcome back to C-Suite Perspectives. I'm your host, Steve Odland from the Conference Board, and I'm joined today by Ron Klein, partner at Holland & Knight and former U.S. Congressman. So Ron, you sat through these negotiations and all the machinations in Congress. I have never talked to a congressman who is a congressperson who is not frustrated by the process. It's not because they love it. It's just you jump on a moving train when you're elected, and here you are. This U.S. process is different. You don't see this elsewhere around the world, do you?
We have a different system. We're not a parliamentary democracy, which can fold if the coalition falls apart. We are in for fixed terms. So House members are in for 2 years. Senators are in for 6 years, and they come up a third of the Senate comes up every 2 years. But it's a different system. So people have fixed terms when they're in it. Now, I think my observation when I got there is I think everyone, all my colleagues, Democrat and Republican, all came to Congress for a good reason. There was something in their life that drove them toward public service, toward maybe they had a child that had a healthcare issue, they want to do something about that, or they're a teacher, or they're a farmer, and they wanted to contribute to a greater good of this country. That's the beauty of our democratic system. And I really believe that's why most people come. What's happened over the last number of years, though, is it's become more of a little bit of a personal vengeance game. Social media, in my opinion, has contributed to some of that feeling. We used to get together after hours, Democrats and Republicans. When I came in my class, we had a number of people, including some members are still there, that we'd go out and have dinner after a good fight on the floor or something like that. You heard about the Tip O'Neill, Ronald Reagan stories. It was similar to that. Probably less and less today for sure. And there's less social time together. And more importantly, the people are just becoming very in their camps. And I'm a Democrat or I'm a Republican and I have to do this. There's no reason why, in my opinion, there should be almost, Democrats all voting this way, Republicans all voting this way. It can't be that their districts are all set up that way. But yet gerrymandering and other things have created either Republican districts or Democrat districts. And a lot of people feel like the art of compromise, which is a very important part of a democracy, doesn't suit them well.
Yeah, and there's just no center anymore. And so there's no overlap in ideology. And the leadership controls more than I think the average layperson understands. You can come in and have a different point of view, but it's very hard to go up against your leadership and have any success.
I agree, Steve. You're right.
Yeah. Now, some parts of the administration are using workarounds during this shutdown. You've heard stories, or we've heard stories about DHS and DOD. How can they do that? Where are these funds coming from? And is that legal?
A lot of things are being done, and the question whether it's legal probably ends up in the courts if there's a party that's aggrieved and they want to take the government to court over that. And some of these things go all the way to the Supreme Court, some of these executive orders. It's a question of whether they're legal or not. What they're doing is they're taking appropriated money from specific programs and moving them around within the agency. So the fact that they can move them around the agency, even though they're appropriate for specific programs, there is a question whether you can do that. And I think they did that for one cycle of military pay. They can't do it for another round, though. So that's why the military pay is at risk here. There's a discussion in the papers today or the media today about the fact that the food assistance, which is going to run out soon, that HHS cannot do a workaround. It sounds like they're trying to apply maximum pressure, even though they have done workarounds in the past for SNAP funding. SNAP is the name of the program. So I think the question is, there may be some flexibility within the way the language is written in the appropriations bills. I think the government is probably pushing the envelope on how much it can do, and it's picking and choosing when it wants to do it. But that's the way it's being played out at the moment.
One thing that I'm not sure Americans are real happy about is the Congress themselves continue to be paid through the shutdown. Is that legal? That doesn't seem consistent with the rest of the government.
It certainly doesn't sound like a good common sense thing that people who are causing this thing should continue to get paid. Believe it or not, it's in the Constitution that the members of Congress have to get paid. What you've seen some of these members say is, well, I will take that money and donate it to a local charity that can use that money. Why it's in the Constitution, I don't know. It shouldn't be in the Constitution, but it is in the Constitution, so they get paid. But that's runs against the grain of what I think most Americans would think is fair. You guys are the ones causing this or can't come to terms on how to fix it, and yet you're getting a paycheck.
Yeah, I think some people argue that the intent of it being in the Constitution was that it wasn't a voluntary job, it was a paid job. But they were talking about shutdowns back then.
You're 100% right, Steve.
Yeah, but it's just an interesting thing. If the government can function now, we've been at this now for more than almost a month. We're coming up on the longest shutdown ever. And if vital government activities can continue, some people say the non-vital activities just are non-vital. So why do we do them at all? You and I understand that, but there's some cynicism here saying if it's not vital, then why are we doing it at all? And so you have to go back to the list of things that are closed, and these are things that citizens and businesses want. But what is required to stay open, and what could they theoretically save money on by just keeping closed?
It's a discussion, and I think probably the better way to handle it instead of under the threat of a shutdown is to do a better job of analyzing each one of these agencies, do zero-based budgeting, make them go back every 2 years and start from scratch and say, hey, I want to justify, you have to justify every single thing that comes up here. One thing I could tell you, serving in the Florida legislature for 14 years, then Congress, is there are a lot of programs that are created with good intentions, but maybe they overlap with things that are already in place. But why aren't we getting rid of those things that are already in place if it's a replacement or something like that? Congress and state legislatures are not particularly good at the oversight of taking something away. And obviously there becomes vested interests of people and businesses that, become dependent on these kinds of things. But if we want to save money, that's a smarter way to do it would be to go back and do a zero-based budgeting process as opposed to just saying, oh, we're going to have a shutdown. And I guess the CDC is not that important because if we can get along and there's no major outbreak of disease right now, and of course, those things are not done on a daily basis. They're done over years, the research and NIH funding for research for cancer. And you can go on in different areas that I think most Americans, almost everybody would say, yeah, these are very important. As to things that maybe aren't as important, fine. Get Congress to do its job and do some good oversight and review of what's out there.
Yeah, you have to bring this up because the cynics are saying, oh, just save money. But you can go without a meal. You can go without eating for a meal or two, but long term, you're going to die. So you do need to eat. And all of these things, all these pieces of the government are important to some piece of society or some function. And
Steve, you mentioned in the earlier part of our conversation about things like healthcare or food and things like that. There are loads of people. It's very uncomfortable about the realization of how many people in the United States are living paycheck to paycheck. And they're one paycheck away from an illness in the family, having to go to the hospital, they're one paycheck away from having food or a house or something that needs major work or damage or something like that, or some family emergency. That's not a real pleasant way to live. And yes, they're dependent. Maybe most of them are more short-term dependent. I know people like to say, oh, they're just dependent on government. Most people aren't, but sometimes they need a temporary support. Unemployment insurance is an example of that. It's only there for a certain period of time to transition until the next job. But this is a serious issue. And when you say we'll shut down food assistance or shut down healthcare assistance or other fuel assistance in the Northeast or the parts of the country, the West, where you have tough winters and you need some subsidy for fuel assistance for keeping heat on, it's real for people. And we're a very generous country. We care about each other, and the government it plays part of that role. Now, are there inefficiencies? All fair game. But there are some basic things that are necessary for keeping people alive and doing what's right for them.
So your point is, you can shut this down temporarily from some small period of time, but you got to get this back open at some point here. And we're coming up against some of these hard stops. So how does this standoff end and when?
I've heard people say Thanksgiving. That's a trigger point that's a long way off. It's still about 3-4 weeks away. That's a long time away. But the reason they're saying that is a massive travel time when people are very dependent on transportation, to go to and from wherever they're going. People by then there'll be massive pressure based on all the things we've already talked about, the necessary things to keep people alive and supported. Huge numbers of people by that point in time may be laid off, not just federal government jobs, but federal contractors' jobs, things like that. You're going to see a real bite into the economy. And I don't think anybody wants to see a bite in the economy until people feel it. That's when it'll occur. And I think that point is beginning to arise. I've heard some people say it'll be in the next week. I think, Steve, the one thing I can assure you is when it gets to that point, it'll happen pretty quickly. It'll just fold like a deck of cards real fast. Right now, they're in the corners and nobody seems to be coming out. President Trump is away on a Far East trip. And again, I don't see anything happening until he gets back. I think that's probably pretty certain.
So some people are just saying change the rule so that it's majority vote rather than waiting for the 60 in the Senate and then we're done. But that has huge implications. Talk about that.
Yeah, so what we're talking about here is the Senate operates off a different set of rules than the House. The House is simple majority. There's 435 people, so 1/2, 50% plus one is what seizes the day. And if they all vote in a partisan way, like they are right now, you have, I think it's a very small majority right now in the House. It's 3 or 4, I think, at this point. One person has to be seated. So it's just a small number. So it just takes a small number of Republicans to switch their vote or a small number of Democrats to go the other direction. So it's real, but right now it's strictly 100% partisan, I think almost 100%. So you've got the majority in the Republican Party in the House, so they have the vote there. And the Senate does take 60 votes because of the filibuster rule. So until some additional Democrats go along with most of the Republicans, I think there's maybe one or two Republicans that are not on the same side, but it's going to take some public pressure. That's the bottom line, public pressure to say enough is enough, get your act together, solve this problem. And I want to go back to the president, his role of being the leader of the country and stepping in and being that force to get Republicans and Democrats to come together and say, we have to finish this thing. But again, I don't think they're going to do it on their own between the House and the Senate. I think it's going to require some leadership in the bully pulpit of the president to use his voice and his strength within his own party and public pressure on either side to come together. I can't give you a timeline, but it's at least a week away because President Trump's away for a bit.
But they could change the rules. The problem with that is that then means whoever has the majority in the Senate, essentially, it becomes like the House, and it's just
I think people should understand the Senate operates, it's 100 people, so it's less than 1/4 the size of the House. It operates because they're 6-year terms, you're not running back to the people every 2 years for a vote, which is it was the original design of the country. Senate, more stability, and House, the people's House. It comes and goes and changes quickly. So yeah, in this case, if you made it like the House, listen, our government goes back and forth. Democrats are in charge 1 year, Republicans the next year. You got to be careful what you ask for. It's not like you're going to be in power in perpetuity. So be prepared. If you're going to change the nature of the Senate, there's been a lot of hesitation to do that by both political parties. So I don't think there's a great inclination, but maybe that'll change.
Yeah, so if this simple rules change would get us through this, but it would have drastic ramifications going forward.
That's right.
Whichever party is in the majority would essentially rule rather than this being more collegial and more.
And Steve, also to your collegial point, one thing about the Senate, because it requires this higher level of vote, it requires more consensus. Okay, so it can't just be one political party running over the other political party. And if you had that, you'd have the changes in the government changing much faster. Policy would go back and forth and back and forth. That's not how our system traditionally works. We sometimes get frustrated that government is so slow. At the same time, it's a benefit to this country that government is methodical and deliberative.
It's part of the whole checks and balances, is your point. And it's a really important point. So they should not fool with these rules or it would be bad. One final thing is what we're talking to the private sector companies here. What should they be doing? Are there any rules of thumb here on contingency planning and so forth?
Yeah, I think, listen, there's a couple of things that some are direct and some are, I already mentioned the direct ones. If you happen to be a contractor, you have to plan on the fact this may last. You probably will get paid, but it's more of a cash flow management kind of scenario you have to work out for yourself. If it's more indirect and impact on the economy, hopefully it'll be temporary and they eventually get around to fixing this thing. But in my opinion, it's a self-inflicted wound. on our economy. But I think you just have to plan for the fact I think it'll get resolved in the matter of weeks, but it could be another week or two.
Former Congressman Ron Klein, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Steve. Pleasure.
Thanks to all of you for listening to C-Suite Perspectives. I'm Steve Odland, and this series has been brought to you by the Conference Board.
You have been listening to C-Suite Perspectives, a podcast by the Conference Board.